Why am I making a YouTube video at 5 o'clock in the morning? Probably because I'm insane. Idea for this, well, I've been thinking about doing YouTube videos for a long time because, what does the world need but another person rattling off their opinions on YouTube? The idea for this, kind of based off of a comment I was going to make on a post on Facebook about sequels, or sequels being different to the initial thing in a series. A lot of times I've noticed a trend of people saying, oh, the original's better, which I sometimes get annoyed by, because the first one isn't always better. In fact, maybe it's just because I'm trying to be contrary, but I tend to like sequels more. I like the development of an idea more. But sometimes people get, including myself, get really attached to their expectations. So there's a couple of reasons somebody might get annoyed by sequels, or a sequel might be lacking in quality, or at least appear to be so. Couple reasons. I'll go through and give a few examples of each. I'll warn you when I start getting into spoiler land. First one is the creators or creator checked out or wasn't skilled enough to finish. Second is the series maybe jumped the shark, and I'll get a little bit more into where that phrase comes from in a minute. The last is the sequels are a sort of antithesis or antithesis to the original story, and the argument has a different conclusion than what we, the reader, may have wanted or expected. So for the first group, the one where either the creators checked out or they seemed to not be skilled enough to finish. A few examples come to mind. Game of Thrones Season 8. A lot of people didn't like it, and I feel like that's a case of both. They were running out of books to riff off of. You get to the last season, everything's getting rushed, or even the season before the last. Things are getting rushed, character development is getting skipped, and I believe that there's some online evidence that they were getting tired. At least the showrunners were. But also that I think the creators of Game of Thrones, the show, I wouldn't say are hacks, but they were doing good at adaptation, but not necessarily at creation once they ran out of stuff to go off of. And another example is, I'm going to use Star Wars a couple times. Star Wars Episode 9 totally felt like either they didn't know where they were going or they were just checking out. The last one, the Powder Mage trilogy by Brian McClellan. I loved book 1 and I loved book 2, and I was dissatisfied with book 3. I'm going to have to go back to it because I'm starting to think the problem wasn't he wasn't skilled enough to finish or he was rushed or something. So there were certain plot lines that did not get resolved or focused on as much as I wanted them to. I'll get to what I think might be the case. So, second reason is series that seem to jump the shark. Now, this happens more often with television than it does with books, but it can happen a lot with books. Where the phrase comes from is from a show called Happy Days, featuring Ron Howard in his younger years, where one character, this isn't season 7, 8, 9, 10, I don't know. I didn't really watch that much of it before my time. The show was getting so crazy that one episode had this character, the Fonz, literally ski jumping over a shark, and that's where jumping the shark comes from. It's okay, we have just gone completely bonkers. From what I understand, even though people still love it all the way to the end, Supernatural does this 3 times, so to the point that it becomes a trope, the world ending and characters dying. Supernatural just jumps the shark for fun, and so it just became a part of the show. The last subject, this is kind of 2 reasons, but reasons people start to get disappointed in sequels is when you have an initial sophomore outing of a series, which seems to give a certain message, then later episodes or whatever give a different message. One example is Star Wars Episode 8. Now, I know that at least the internet makes it seem like this is a pretty divisive movie. I loved it, but also think about stories so much that when a story surprises me, I value that a lot. Star Wars Episode 8 seems to say a lot of things differently from Star Wars Episode 7. Man, I would have loved a Star Wars sequel trilogy either completely directed by... shoot, what's his name? Rian Johnson? Whoever directed Episode 8. Completely directed by him, or completely directed by J.J. Abrams. Actually, maybe completely directed by J.J. Abrams, but, like, have a plan from the beginning? That would have been great. So much lost potential. Another series, which I'll stay away from spoilers on these two, is Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. There were some people who were dissatisfied with parts of the third book. It's a trilogy, the main Mistborn trilogy. Mistborn kind of plays with things about like prophecies and chosen ones and things like that, and plays out your expectations differently than you might think. For me, Mistborn, the ending of the third Mistborn book, is like one of the best endings of something I've read, watched, or consumed probably ever. That's one example where the conclusion of the argument that the series is making is either a conclusion that the reader didn't want or doesn't agree with. Then there's The Good Place, which I will avoid spoilers on this, which is a TV show about the afterlife. It's very silly, but it's also like incredibly philosophical. Like they get into Kant, they get into Descartes, they get into epistemology, they get into morality. It's what happens when you get a bunch of bored, really smart people together. They just make fun of their own knowledge base, which is about philosophy. Good Place, great show. The ending had a conclusion that I didn't agree with about the afterlife and what the afterlife could be, but I understood it and I could appreciate it. You don't have to worry about hating it if you're going to go watch it. Just know that for some of you, you're going to kind of disagree with some of the conclusions, but they are very well founded and argued in the context of the show. Now I come to 3 examples that are going to be a little bit spoilery. 2 of them might help you enjoy the later series. Let me do the simpler ones first. First is a really old one. You have the initial book by Harper Lee, To Kill a Mockingbird. To Kill a Mockingbird talks a lot about views on race in the South, morality. It's a really excellent story. Go Set a Watchman is the kind of sequel. The main character, she is grown up, and she starts to see the complexities of her father, who seemed to be very like race agnostic in his views in the first story. But in the second one, you see that there is some entrenched racism even in him. Some people didn't like that sequel. We like to see mirrors of our own morality in history, but it showed a more nuanced approach to main character's father. So next one is the Lightbringer series by Brent Weeks. Lightbringer series, which I will do my best to not spoil, but it deals with aspects of, again, chosen ones, but also like the power of the one dude to change everything. A very, very common fantasy trope. I'm the one person that can fix all the stuff. The first book establishes a character as like that guy. This is the person with the charisma and the force of personality to just change everything. And in later books, they just stick him more and more and more through the ringer and bring him all the way down. And though he is still an important character at the end, he's not the only important one. In fact, he's not like the... I better stop there before I spoil anything. If you go in expecting the entire series to be about the charismatic chosen one who can change the world with their attitude, you're going to be a little disappointed. In essay writing, there's this format that goes by thesis, antithesis or antithesis, and synthesis. Thesis, you're making a kind of statement. You go on and you explore it, and a lot of times that's what the first book is of a series. Some series don't go further than that, and that's fine. Like, not every book series needs to be, like, subversive and controversial. But anyway, you start with your thesis, your main point, and then you take a seemingly completely opposing viewpoint, and then you kind of bring them together at the end in the synthesis. Lightbringer does a bit of that. This one, this is going to be spoilers, but it might be the kind of spoiler that makes you appreciate the book I'm going to talk about more. It's the kind of thing where, in my opinion, if you have this sort of stuff spoiled for you, you'll be way more intrigued. And that is Dune by Frank Herbert. The very first book is very hero's journey. The charismatic heroes rise to power and kind of omnipotence and saving the world. And that's one reason that, like, I as a teenager, I really loved it. Though they're all still, like, bestsellers, a lot of people have problems with the sequels because they feel, they're like, where is this going? Why are we, like, jumping over here and there? And why is our main character, our, like, a messiah figure, falling? And to understand that, it helps to understand a little bit of Frank Herbert's background. One of his famous quotes is, the worst thing that can happen to a people is to get a charismatic leader. That's one of his points about Dune, is he takes the hero's journey, this concept of identity and chosen oneness, and the individual who goes to, like, transform the world to their own glory or whatever, and nukes it, like completely blows it to smithereens, comes up with something, you know, better and more transcendent. But the thing is about Dune, the reason it's not like, oh man, the writer went in some weird, crazy direction. If you look at the first Dune book, the signs are there. Paul, the main character, he starts to see the negative effects of messiah making in a culture. He sees how he's at the center of it, but he kind of feels out of control. In later books, we start to get into his son's mindset, who really is kind of the chosen one, in the sense that he does his best to destroy the external influences of charismatic leaders and chosen ones. And one reason we love the messiah storytelling is because it gives us someone to look at and to surrender our right to think to. So often in the world, we do that with fallible mortals. That's kind of the main point Dune is making, is that humankind must learn to think for themselves, to not surrender their responsibility to think to leaders. And that's a lot of the problems we have today, where people just sign on for a package of ideas and beliefs, or thus spoke my leader. So with Dune, if you realize the chosen one narrative is going to be not only deconstructed, but shown for what a lie it is, the hero's journey is kind of a lie. A lot of people like the charismatic chosen one narratives because we like to put ourselves into that persona. We want to be that character. But it's a trap, because for one, we can't all be that character. And not everyone can be the chosen charismatic leader. And for two, the whole idea is a lie. The world isn't made by powerful individuals. The world is made by a sea of people who fall into broad historical trends. It's kind of interesting that to deny the chosen one narrative is to at once almost get rid of your individual specialness, but at the same time to admit your own personal responsibility. A chosen leader and a chosen hero is not going to come save you. You're not going to find some average or some random human that's going to just save you. You're not going to be that person either. But change in a world and in a culture is brought about by millions of individuals, billions, trillions even. So kind of trying to bring it full circle, there are some stories that have good messages that like deconstruct, or as I like to joke, nuke the seeming original message. It is that initial thesis, and then they start to break it apart, and you have some sort of synthesis, which is I think what happens with Dune. It is, you are one individual in an ocean of individuals. Not one droplet controls the waves, but every droplet makes up the waves. Understand what you are, you can make positive change. If you can accept your responsibility to think for yourself and to not sign that away or hand that away off to somebody else to save mental energy, and if you can convince other people to do the same, then so many problems we have will at least start to get better. So anyway, that's the first episode of whatever this show is going to be called. Fare thee well, fair humans. So this is your alien robot 14th century transplant psycho weirdo guy, Thomas Fox. Have a good day.